This month's JW Broadcasting is all about thinking like Jehovah, but it accidentally disproved that there's fellowship in practice and exposed some of the cultiest part of this religion. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's begin.
This is JW Broadcasting.
We start with Seth Hyatt, helper to the creepiest part of this called the Service Committee, who is here to give a speech about having Jehovah's thinking.
What do you think? Is it possible for an imperfect human to elevate his or her thinking to agree with God's thinking? And if so, how can we do this?
The term Jehovah's thinking is completely unbiblical, but it's a crucial part of this and any other cult. According to the Byte model, all cults control the members' behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. And Jehovah's thinking is how the Jehovah's Witness cult controls the members' thoughts.
Jehovah's thinking, his wisdom, his understanding of the earth's physical makeup and processes, and his intimate knowledge of each one of us imperfect humans is elevated. So much so that it may seem far beyond our reach. But the good news is that Jehovah is not inaccessible, and neither is his thinking.
That's how this cult gains control over the thoughts of its followers and how it can blame members for wrong thoughts. This is textbook thought control. This cult is telling members that their thoughts are wrong and bad and that they need to have Jehovah's thoughts instead of their own. And who comes up with what Jehovah is thinking? Well, this cult, of course.
If we're willing to put forth the effort to make the climb, that is, to learn Jehovah's standards and apply them in our lives, pure worship elevates us. Why? Because Jehovah's laws and principles are elevated. If we cultivate a love for Jehovah's standards, our thinking becomes elevated. We begin to think more in harmony with Jehovah's thoughts.
By telling you that your thoughts are wrong and then inviting you to change those thoughts to what this cult decides Jehovah's thoughts are, you lose confidence in your own thoughts. This makes it so you are unable to wake up to indoctrination. After all, if your own thoughts can be wrong, especially when they go against what this cult teaches, then that's when you need to trust in the cult over your own thoughts and your own mind. And to prove it, the cult can just give you the most generic story about someone being bad and sad until they join the cult. No specifics or anything.
Typical is the experience of one young person who wrote, "I lived a life of immorality and drunkenness. I had sexual diseases. I also sold drugs and just didn't care about anything. Now," she says, "I enjoy peace of mind, self-respect, a hope for the future, a real family, and best of all, a relationship with our Father, Jehovah."
Who needs specifics when you can just trust this guy's word that he's properly representing the story? But this is disgusting, not just because it's a form of thought control. This is disgusting because it's all part of the superiority culture in the Jehovah's Witness religion. Thinking the cult's thoughts instead of your own is how you, as a Jehovah's Witness, know to be superior to other people. Trusting your own thoughts means losing that status of superiority, as he's about to remind us.
If we abandon Jehovah's standards, we quickly lose our elevated standing and perspective. So it's important to hold tightly to Jehovah's elevated way of doing things, even when it's not easy to do so. But what if we do make a serious mistake or become involved in serious wrongdoing? We lose altitude. It's like a free fall at the time.
This, just like the term Jehovah's thinking, is completely absent from the Bible. Nowhere in the Bible does it tell you that you need to think like God, nor does it say that thinking like God is how you achieve superiority. If anything, the only one ever inviting people to think like God is the serpent in the Garden of Eden. That's the argument that the serpent uses to tempt Eve into eating from the tree of knowledge. Jehovah's Witnesses excuse their cultiest practices by saying that they simply do what's in the Bible. But if you were to actually read and study the Bible, you'll realize those practices are not just without biblical backing, but that the Bible tells you to do the opposite of what this cult is telling you to do. And nowhere is that more apparent than in one of their cultiest, most controlling practices, shunning.
For example, we discussed the case of the unrepentant wrongdoer in the congregation in Corinth. His sinful course was so shocking that Paul said it was not even found among the nations. Truly, this Christian man had abandoned Jehovah's elevated standards. Because he was unrepentant, Paul instructed the elders to remove the man from the congregation. And yet, perhaps only months later, Paul instructed the elders to kindly forgive and comfort the man, to confirm their love for him. Why? The discipline had yielded positive results. The man repented and was welcomed back into the congregation as a brother. What good news! What a beautiful example of Jehovah's elevated thinking.
Did you notice how instead of showing you the actual verse, Seth doesn't even mention where in the Bible you can find this story and just shows you a picture instead? That's because this story also breaks their doctrine. If you ask a Jehovah's Witness why they remove and shun people, assuming they're being direct with you instead of trying to gaslight you into thinking that they don't do that, they'll direct you to this Bible verse that says to remove the sinner from amongst yourselves. They'll also show you this verse in isolation and pretend this is a blanket command to all Christians and that they have no choice but to follow it. Let's put a pin on that and go through Seth's story. According to him, Paul instructed the elders in the congregation of Corinth to disfellowship this one man who had sinned worse than people in the nations. Then months later, he told elders to embrace the person back into the congregation. The man repented and he was accepted back in. Right out of the gate, you can see how this differs from how Jehovah's Witnesses do things. There was no committee of elders to judge the man or his repentance in the congregation. Instead, Paul was telling them what to do from a completely different city. And this command wasn't determined in private, away from the eyes of the congregation. This was handled completely in public, out in the open. It's not just the congregation of Corinth that knew that this was happening. It's anyone who has a Bible. That's how out in the open it was being handled, that we know how it was handled all the way down to today. If this exact situation of a man committing sexual immorality happened today in a congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, this is not how it would be handled. Instead, it would all be handled privately and confidentially, with the congregation being kept completely in the dark and only told by the elders who judged the man in private that they all need to start shunning the man. And the man would be disfellowshipped for years, usually no less than half a year. And to show repentance, the man would have to not just stop sinning, but to attend the meetings regularly while being removed and to talk to the elders so the elders can judge his repentance again. Clearly, that is not how Paul or the elders were doing things back then. But then you have the rest of the story. A few months later, Paul writes the second letter to the Corinthians, and he tells the whole congregation to stop shunning the man and to instead embrace him back into the congregation. Why? Well, because according to Paul, the rebuke of the majority of the congregation had already been sufficient, and the man had stopped sinning. That is why Paul tells the congregation to love him, so he wouldn't be consumed with excessive sadness. And this is the part of the Bible that completely breaks Jehovah's Witness shunning doctrine, because Jehovah's Witnesses will direct you to this verse out of context to explain why they all have to shun whomever the elders decide, but will completely ignore this second letter that was written likely just months later. Why? Well, for the same reason that Seth didn't mention what the man had done as a sin, to pretend this is how Jehovah's Witnesses do things, when it's kind of the opposite. First of all, because someone guilty of this level of sexual immorality will likely have to spend over a year, maybe longer, being shunned and removed from the congregation before being eligible for reinstatement, especially if the sin was this well known to everyone in the congregation. Second, any sinner who has been removed from the congregation has to take steps towards reinstatement, namely, going to the elders and asking for a reinstatement. Then they have to attend the meetings while being removed for however the elders see fit until they announce him back into the congregation. And that is not what happened here, was it? Paul told the Corinthians to embrace the man back because the man was no longer sinning, and they were still rejecting him. The sinner didn't have to meet with the elders or do any steps towards reinstatement other than stop sinning. And finally, we know that the Jehovah's Witnesses fellowshipping process is completely anti-biblical because this story makes it clear that the verse saying, remove the sinner from amongst yourself, wasn't a blanket command to all Christians, like Jehovah's Witnesses pretend it is, because it wasn't even a blanket command towards the congregation in Corinth. Paul very clearly says that the rebuke of the majority had sufficed. Now, do Jehovah's Witnesses believe that the rebuke of the majority is enough when it comes to dealing with disfellowship people? Well, no. Instead, they instruct that every single Christian needs to shun them, family and friends included, regardless of how close you are to them.
When the elders determine that a repentant wrongdoer is allowed to remain in the congregation, or one is reinstated back into the congregation, we might find it challenging to display a welcoming spirit, especially if we were personally affected in some way by the wrongdoing.
This is forced unity kicked into action. You're not allowed to reject being friends with Jehovah's Witnesses, not even if they've done something against you. Instead, you need to be friendly to everyone inside this religion. This is exactly what got this religion into hot waters with the Australian Royal Commission, where a case was exposed of a victim of CSA being forced to socialize and befriend their victimizer. And like the rest of their cultish teachings, this is not only completely unbiblical, it's against the Bible itself. Matthew chapter 5 verses 23 and 24 commands Christians to solve things with the person they've sinned against before worrying about any other act of adoration. If Jehovah's Witnesses followed this verse, then they would be saying the opposite. That if you've sinned against somebody, your priority should be to fix things with them instead of going to the meetings. But that's not how it's done in this religion. It's the elders who hold all the power. So if the elders decided that the person who has sinned against you is repentant, then you need to befriend them and attend meetings with them, even when they haven't solved things with you. Nowhere is this more tragic or infuriating than when the sin is CSA.
After Jim had done a number of temporary stints at Bethel, we were invited to go for 2 weeks. So we went with the boys. We had such a good time.
After that, they started talking to me seriously. Do you think you and your family could move to New York to live at Bethel and to work full time for us?
This is a story of a lawyer who became a lawyer before he became a Jehovah's Witness and was so in demand by this cult to help them fight their legal battles that they invited not just him, but his whole family to move to New York so he could work for free full time for the cult. And he helped in a country that is now giving trouble to the Jehovah's Witness again.
One of the countries I worked with overseas was France. In 1998, the government there decided to impose a 60% tax on all the donations the branch received between the years 1993 to 1996. Soon after, they added a penalty to the tax, making the entire amount 108% of the donations received. No organization could pay that. So we began litigating. At this point in time, our expert did not want to put Bible scriptures and tell the story of Jehovah's Witnesses, who we are. And that's why we litigate. We don't litigate just to win cases, but we litigate, as Jesus said in Matthew 10:18, to make it turn out to be a witness. So we had to put this in the brief. He consented to put it in. In 2011, when we won the case before the European Court of Human Rights, the victory was on a violation of Jehovah's Witnesses' freedom of religion. Jehovah won on the exact point he wanted, freedom of religion.
This clearly shows to Jehovah's Witnesses that the lawyers don't simply try to defend freedom of religion. This religion is against freedom of religion, since it punishes people who leave, which goes against freedom of religion. Instead, this religion is all about telling others that they follow the Bible, and about getting as much governmental help as possible while paying as few taxes as possible, and while condemning all governments, saying that they are all part of Satan's system of things soon to be destroyed. And to fight those battles, they use deeply indoctrinated people like this guy and his family to fight those battles for nothing in return. The next segment is a tear and persecution segment, focused on two Jehovah's Witnesses who were persecuted for their beliefs but didn't lose them.
There were 64 cells, 32 on each side, and we used to perch ourselves up on the bars above the door and made a little mini hammock, as it were. And when everything was locked up and quiet, then we would have the meetings.
Did you see how they're so hungry for persecution that they got a Jehovah's Witness to pretend he's in prison for his beliefs so they could take a pic of it? Persecution is one of the few things that still makes this religion feel real to the followers. So this religion squeezes all of the juice of persecution that it can, going as far as to reenact persecution just so it can record it. And their stories of persecution accidentally show that people weren't even that interested in persecuting them.
When I got into prison, we were asking the authorities, please let us have the memorial. And the answer was a definite no. So we were ready to do it on our own, but we kept asking. And eventually on the Memorial Day, that Tuesday afternoon, suddenly they let us all out of our cells, let us go and shower. We weren't allowed to use the showers normally. And they said, get dressed for your service tonight.
You need to be indoctrinated to think this is a compelling story of Jehovah's Hand, when in reality, it just shows that they respected their freedom of religion in prison far more than Jehovah's Witnesses do. A Jehovah's Witness parent, for instance, cannot allow their child to do any kind of religious ceremony in their home, something that even evil governments persecuting Jehovah's Witnesses allow Jehovah's Witnesses to do while in prison. But they're not done with this persecution galore, because the next segment isn't just about persecution. They even got Bethelites to pretend to be the victims and victimizers of persecution for propaganda purposes.
We had the worst kind of food in prison. They fed us rancid rice, 50% rice, 50% water. First few days in prison, you can't eat it. It was terrible. But after some time, you're hungry, you can eat it.
This whole segment is about a man who was imprisoned by the Chinese government for being a Jehovah's Witness, and it's completed with more dramatization of his persecution made exclusively for propaganda purposes. The lesson is clear. These people were able to face persecution because they were strong Jehovah's Witnesses. And you will face persecution, this call decided. Are you a good Jehovah's Witness now so you can endure persecution then?
There's so much to explore for family worship in the book of Amos, isn't there?
Yes, there is. To see Jehovah discern the potential in such a humble, hard-working shepherd and then entrust him to boldly preach a vital message, it's such a fascinating account.
This is just a silly and completely forgettable segment of a couple preparing for their family worship by enthusiastically going through lessons in the Bible. This is a double lie because practically nobody prepares family meeting, and because no Jehovah's Witness is enthusiastically learning about anything this cult teaches. If they enthusiastically read the Bible and studied it, then they would realize that their beliefs are completely unbiblical with this broadcast itself and what it has to say about shunning people. And to round up the tea and thought control, we have a morning worship speech that is all about how being modest means being a good and obedient cult member.
A person who is modest, he's going to be reasonable, he's going to create peace, he's going to be ready to obey, he's going to communicate with fellow workers, they're going to enjoy working with him, and he will have a pleasant time himself. Wisdom from Jehovah is always better.
Sure, Harold, it's a shame Jehovah forgot to add that into the Bible. So lucky for us to have the Jehovah's Witnesses to add that stuff Jehovah forgot. Can you believe even the music video of the month is culty?
There was something that was said that really did stick with me, that no matter where I am from, I can be your family.
This is all about family replacement, which the Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to do with any family that isn't part of their religion. If your mom, son, or uncle, or daughter decides not to be a Jehovah's Witness, then you need to replace them with a good Jehovah's Witness. And it's not even good or catchy at twice the speed.
That no matter where I am from, I can be your family, yeah. Oh, I can be your family, yeah.
All in all, this is super culty, not catchy, and completely forgettable. 4 out of 10, nobody will be playing this at a wholesome Jehovah's Witness get-together.
In this month's program, we've learned that our thinking can be elevated if we test out Jehovah's support, take full advantage of Christian meetings, and lean on Jehovah in times of trial.
Sure we did, but we're still missing the postcard of a cool-looking place with Jehovah's Witnesses, accompanied by a country description written by ChatGPT.
Nicaragua. Nicaragua boasts 68 types of ecosystems that plants and animals live in. Some believe the country's name can be traced back to Nicaragua, a late 15th century chief who lived on the shore of present-day Lake Nicaragua when Spanish conquerors arrived.
And with that, this month's JW Broadcasting finally comes to a close. This was a surprisingly culty broadcast with thought control, family replacement, persecution fear-mongering, and anti-biblical teachings. But if you made it this far, it's probably because you like learning how cults work. If you did, consider subscribing to this channel and maybe supporting me like this champs over here to get access to Sparlock downloadables, extra videos, and more.